But welcome everybody. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button.
I remember in middle school when you felt self-conscious if you were the last one to go through puberty. That really went topsy-turvy, didn't it?
Sometimes the house it's too much explaining yourself and it's too apologetic.
Be sure to hit the notifications bell.
I actually do believe Israel won't just bomb countless civilians.
Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this up on your Facebook.
You have to be kind to people. Be kind to the guys in this mess in the first place.
Put this up on your Reddit.
Chile is a country.
Be sure to cut and paste, a link to this to go into your favorite Facebook chat group.
It's good to see so many normal people in here.
Now, spanking isn't just my deep, dark personal secret. It's America's deep, dark secret.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere.
Put this on WhatsApp. Put this on Telegram. Put this on your favorite messenger app.
Hello and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I'm your host, an Untitled Anarchist Seagull called Elise. And I think I've got an interesting hour and a half planned here. Got some various interesting bullshit. For one thing, there's one thing that I'm actually quite excited to show you. And there's some backstory to understand why. You see, there's a project you might have heard of at GW University, George Washington University, called the National Security Archive. And what they do is, it's just a huge publicly available online archive of all kinds of declassified documents. I mean, there's just amazing stuff on there. And back in the days of Web 1.0, I was on an email list of theirs to send, to notify when new document collections had come out. This is like 20 years ago or so. So, one time, the document collection was a collection of CIA documents on Iraq from the 1950s. So, kind of curious what the CIA was getting up to in Iraq in the 1950s and what they were saying about it behind closed doors, so I check it out. It turns out, it is about a collection of propaganda films that they came up with. Where they use a popular, beloved character of Muslim folklore, Nasreddin Hoja, who you can find in Muslim folklore basically everywhere in the entire Muslim world. It's just across cultures. He's ubiquitous. He's this sort of humorous, wise teacher sort of character, and is one of the most beloved figures in traditional Muslim folklore anyway. So they decided they were going to use this character to broadcast their propaganda in little movies they made. And what this collection of documents that I found on the National Security Archive all the way back then was the focus groups they did in Iraq in 1951 after showing people these movies. And ever since I read those, I have wanted to see them. Now, the thing we did where we looked at the face-to-face with communism, the horrors of communist dictator, a couple of weeks ago, that got a lot of response. People seem to be into that. Also, a number of dickheads missed the point in the YouTube comments, but it's YouTube comments. Dickheads missing the point is kind of part of the fun of YouTube comments. But anyway, I decided I was going to have a look through the U.S. National Archive YouTube channel, see if I could find more of this shit. And what I found was something I never dreamed I would find. There are two relatively short films. A Lesson from the Hoja and the Hoja's Strange Ways. And what they are is these CIA propaganda films from the 1950s to explain to Iraqis why they should do what the US wants them to do. And I haven't watched them. I did check long enough to see that the audio, this is an English dub. It isn't in Arabic, which is good because my Arabic is very limited. I couldn't follow it if it was in Arabic. But anyway, so I think we're gonna have to check these out because you see, with the Iraqis hated these. The focus group results that they got when the CIA went and asked people who'd seen these things were just they took the piss right out of them. They just completely said it was just the most ridiculous thing they'd ever seen, and I want to see ridiculous CIA propaganda. I'm sure, chat, that you are probably curious as well. We're gonna look at a lesson from the Hoja. Nasreddin Hoja as imagined by the CIA. Yeah, well, I forgot to mention they're puppet movies. I mean, remember, this is like, they decided to make this for Arab audiences while using the sort of soundtracks and imagery that Hollywood used and to some extent uses today for not to show stereotypes of Arab audiences to non-Arab audiences. I mean, already getting off to a great start. Screen resolution up. Yes, good. A lesson from the Hoja, as told to the CIA. You know, it's kind of fitting that in bad CIA propaganda you can see the strings on the puppets. That's sort of a neat little meta level that they put in there.
It is no secret that men frequently visit the coffee house for more than a cup of coffee. In our coffee house, they often go to talk and to listen to the wise sheikh who, from time to time, retell...
You're doing your feet up on the table. I mean, you see, this is the level of cultural awareness they had. Because, like, that is already not something that you would do in a lot of places. But in a lot of cultures, including, like, Arab Muslim culture, showing your feet like this is even more off-putting than it is normally in a coffee shop.
Tells the stories of Nasreddin Hoja.
Here is a book with the right ideas.
Reading is good for everyone.
Listen to...
Wow, that's so profound.
What it says. Right here. The ideal state must own everything. Business and industry and farms. Also, it must control all art and science. Practices that divide people, like free enterprise and religion and different political parties, would be forbidden.
Wow, I mean, what I love is the subtlety of this. It does not hammer away at you, it just lets you draw your own conclusions. Just subtle suggestiveness.
Everybody would be free to serve the all-powerful state and share in the blessings of its power.
That is nonsense.
Did you say nonsense?
Yeah, it is nonsense. Like, this is just what the CIA... This is how the CIA would describe communism, not how actual proponents would say it is.
Yes, I said nonsense. Hamid, why would a radical system like this help our country?
Because that's just what it says, right here, in the book of my party.
Your vision, Hamid, is based on a little bit of knowledge.
Very much like the screenwriters of this movie.
What you do not have to guide your actions is long-term experience. By feeling one leg of a strange beast, could you describe the whole animal?
Well, no, but it sounds like that's a good way to get a hoof in your head.
An animal, Effendi?
Yes, Burhan. I was remembering something Nasruddin Hoxha once taught.
Okay, here it comes. This is gonna be subtle.
Long ago. Sit down, Hamid. Listen to this story called A Lesson from the Hoxha and try to understand how it might apply to you.
Wow, I mean, they really respect the audience. You gotta love that. I mean, they don't just like smash it right in front of your face. They just sort of finesse the message in. You know, like the strings you can actually totally see.
Long ago, when Nasruddin Hoxha was teaching in his village, 3 of the older boys decided...
Ah, hola, tengo una pregunta. Depende. Primero, hay que tener en cuenta que la IA no existe. No existe inteligencia artificial. Lo que existe son algoritmos de aprendizaje de máquina. O sea, la inteligencia artificial es un término de la ciencia ficción que dentro del proceso de comercialización de estos algoritmos, de estos modelos grandes de lenguaje, toda esa weá, se ha ocupado para vender algo que simplemente no existe, para venderle a la gente lo que la gente se imagina. Estos algoritmos sí pueden servir en muchos sentidos, eso es cierto. Sobre todo en aplicaciones bastante restringidas, limitadas. Por ejemplo, cuando se trata... bueno, por ejemplo, en mi programa de edición de foto existen herramientas que ocupan aprendizaje, bueno, estos algoritmos de aprendizaje para corregir faltas del lente, por ejemplo, del objetivo. Para corregir, bueno, parte que han salido borrosas y todas esas weas. En esas aplicaciones bastante restringidas puede ser muy útil. Pero el gran error es terminar pensando que se trata de una máquina que sabe pensar. De una máquina que se encuentra cerca de la conciencia. Y eso es falso, es puro marketing.
Decided that they needed no more schooling and much more time to enjoy themselves, which made life miserable for the villagers.
Like, this is supposed to be anti-communist propaganda here. And it's like... no es que pueda llegar a ser una estafa. Es una estafa. Están vendiendo algo que no tienen para vender. Algo que no existe. Algo que no tiene las capacidades que le atribuyen. Es una estafa. Y por eso también esa burbuja está por romperse. I mean, we've already just got off to a great start where they're talking to this audience. This is for adult Iraqi audiences in the 1950s to explain to them why they should adopt the CIA's view on how Iraq should be run. And they're just like essentially talking to them like literal children.
delighted with their mischief, the boys spared no one, not even the Hocha himself.
Now, remember, for anyone who's just joining, this is 1950s CIA propaganda that I read about in declassified documents 20 years ago, and I'd always kind of wanted to see. Because the thing is, the Iraqis, the audiences that they focus group this stuff with, back in the 1950s, when the CIA was trying to introduce this crap into the culture in Iraq, they hated it. They absolutely ripped the piss right out of it. What the fuck's he doing? I mean, it looked like he was about to mount the threshold. Okay, and what the hell does this, okay, somehow this is supposed to be brought back to this is anti-communist propaganda. It's getting off to a great start. It's also out of focus. They shot this on film. There is no reason that the video quality should be this bad. The reason the video quality on newer movies that have been digitized from like the, the 90s or the 2000s or whatever is so bad is because they shot it, they shot it digitally. And so the quality, the image quality degrades relative to what becomes possible through digital means. But when you have things shot on film, there is no reason that this should be this bad. Unless they did not bother to focus the lens properly to begin with.
Oh, no! No! It isn't possible! It can't be! Oh, help! Help someone! Something terrible has happened. It's my wife. My good wife. She's hung herself. Look at her! Help someone! Oh, help! This is terrible. Oh, my wife.
That's fucked up. This is what the kids are doing when they're not in school. I mean, I have a feeling the reason these kids aren't in school is because school doesn't want them. That's fucked up.
Finally, the patient villagers decided the boys had gone too far and must be punished. But the Hocha had other advice. I really believe the trouble with these boys is that their little bit of learning has gone to their heads.
Where do you get that from, though? Like, what little bit of learning taught them that it was a good idea to, like, make somebody believe that his wife just killed herself? Like, what the fuck?
Clearly, they think themselves far wiser than their elders.
Really?
They must...
Is that what we're supposed to take out of this? That they think they're wise?
Be taught that true wisdom comes from experience. The villagers wondered how this could be done, and the Hocha had an answer. Tomorrow afternoon, I will give these foolish boys a lesson from the Hocha.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, so what? How is this going to be tied in?
Next day, in the village square, Nasruddin made a strange bargain with the three blindfolded boys. You feel you are clever enough to obey no one and do just as you please. Very well. Let us test your wisdom by bringing a strange animal here before you.
Like a platypus.
Each of you may feel it with your hands. Then,
If you can describe the whole animal clearly, you are free to play your days away. But if you cannot, you must go to work helping your fathers. Of course, the boys were very confident of their own abilities. And as soon as they had agreed, the Hocha decided the lesson could begin.
It's a brontosaurus, apparently. Godzilla or something.
As Nasruddin and the villagers looked on, the first boy groped his way forward and finally clasped his arms about a thick leg.
I know. The animal is tall and round, like a tree.
I mean, it looks like an elephant, but again, what's this got to do with anything?
When the second boy found the animal, his hands reached out and took its measure.
It's a very patient animal, very clearly.
This is easy. The animal is broad and flat like a wall.
None of them
The
are very
largest
good at
boy
this.
was just starting forward when something round and twisting brushed against him.
It's a snake. This animal is a big snake, Hocha. You are trying to kill us.
And with that,
No, to be fair, I mean, he could be right about that last bit. Elephants, when aroused by assholes, can be kind of dangerous.
Nasruddin signaled for the animal to leave. Now the boys fell to violent arguing. The first insisted that the animal must be tall and round. The next knew it was broad and flat, while the biggest boy was positive that the animal must be like a snake. And the biggest boy, who spoke loudest, won the argument.
Like, okay, I'm really, at this point, wondering how in the hell they are going to try to link this in. And note, whatever they did, however they did, it was actually not well received. In part, like the Iraqi audiences described this as insulting, amongst many other things.
Like all the villagers, the Hocha was well satisfied. Now see...
I'm not sure why. I mean, that isn't much of a payback.
See how wrong you were? You are young, I know, and perhaps have never seen an elephant before. But you were quite ready to say what it would look like, even though you had felt only part of this animal.
Well, you didn't tell him it was an elephant.
Remember, true knowledge and wisdom come only after long experience. Now go home. You have had your lesson from the Hocha.
Okay, here comes the tie-in.
The lesson of the Hocha still applies to us all, Hamid. So be careful about putting your faith in the radical new ideas which you read in 1 or 2 books.
As opposed to just allowing the US and Britain to control us. Because that's worked out so well for us.
There are countless others, don't forget, which recommend the wisdom of long experience. Perhaps before you decide, you would do well to read all the facts. That is what the Hocha taught, and it makes good sense.
Oh, no, that's not really what the Hoja taught. And also, like, what the... Yeah, you can see why these audiences did not like it. I mean, first of all, they can't even, like, bother to, when, he's reading this book, which is supposedly, the Book of Communism, whatever the hell. It doesn't say what it is. And the way they have it read is, the way they write the text is already designed to be how somebody hostile to the idea would describe it, rather than to what they would describe it themselves. And then this, oh god, this is, you can see why they would not like this. Okay, now we've got another of these. We've got a bunch of other, like, US propaganda shit from, like, the 50s and 60s, including some, like, based in Latin America. Also kind of interested, we had started out looking at some liberal Zionist bullshit. Because on this channel, we've looked at a lot of right-wing Zionist bullshit, especially JNS TV, but liberal Zionists really get let off the hook a lot of the time. Then they're allowed to sort of fly under the radar, even though they're just as racist, but they just manage to be more socially acceptable. And we were looking at J Street's bullshit statehood proposal, and I'm kind of curious to continue that. What's everyone think, chat?
More hawkish place,
See, the most recent thing
which
that they
is
had
usually
done,
what's
let's back it
happening
up a
during
little bit.
a war, especially when Palestinians see the...
I'm gonna back this up a little bit, is they had just got done explaining that the carrot for all of the things that the Palestinians were going to be required to do in order to get this statehood, the carrot was that the US would recognize Palestine. And they're very quick to add that this does not mean that they get territory. It just means that the US rhetorically, recognizes Palestine in theory. Sí, a veces lo hago. Oh, and it's just shitty screen resolution.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for laying that out so clearly, and also for noting that.
Yeah, she was laying out very clearly that this statehood proposal does not actually include anything the Palestinians can take to the bank.
Piece in the Washington Post, which I think is really important. Nadav, I want to turn to you, and I know that you obviously have been very active, and Nadav has been volunteering in an integral part of the Hostage Families Forum in Israel, and very active in pursuing also and supporting families who are standing up in support for a negotiated stop to fighting and a release of the hostages. And I want to ask you about Israeli public opinion relating to this proposal that we...
Well, I mean, Israeli public opinion is utterly ghoulish. The overwhelming majority of the Israeli Jewish population, like 80-90%, says that the genocide isn't going far enough.
We laid out, especially at such a sensitive time. There's recent polling indicating that the public has shifted further to the right as a reaction to the October 7th Hamas massacre. And obviously, we've seen the statements of the Israeli leaders that are very much dismissing the concept of Palestinian statehood. And many in the Israeli public don't really want to talk about the possibility of two states recognizing a Palestinian.
Yeah, I mean, apart from everything else, it's just fucking impossible. They've already, for all intents and purposes, annexed the West Bank. They are ethnically cleansing the West Bank as this is going on, and they are flattening Gaza. Like, so the idea that there is, I mean, to the extent that anyone ever took the idea of a two-state solution, i.e. an apartheid solution, seriously, There's no way to take it seriously. I mean, now it's just a fucking pipe dream.
And state, and also viewing it perhaps as a gift to
decoy,
Hamas following the October 7th massacre. Can you respond to this? What is the Israeli public opinion on the issue of statehood?
Notice she talks about the October 7th massacre. Doesn't say a word about what's been going on since then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very true that both Israelis and Palestinians, and Nidal will speak for the Palestinians, but both move to a more hawkish place, which is usually what happening during a war, especially when Palestinians see the horrors in Gaza in Al Jazeera, and Israelis see their own pain.
Well, I mean, they don't have to watch Al Jazeera though. They're watching. There are plenty of horrors going on. He's talking about Palestinians in the West Bank here. They don't need to go to Al Jazeera to see what's going on in Gaza to see horrible shit going on. There are pogroms happening on the daily. People are just being, entire villages are just being expelled from one day to the next.
Not the other side pain, and everybody are very in their insecurities and traumas, like you said, Dina.
Yeah, it's just both
but
sides.
We have to remember that this is usually what happened in the times of war. And if you would ask Israelis during the Yom Kippur War in 73,
which it's worth remembering was when Egypt tried to take back, and eventually succeeded in taking back, Egyptian territory that Israel had illegally occupied and colonized in 1967. But somehow we're going to find that Israel's going to be the victim here.
With the Egyptians, if anyone would believe that there will be peace with Egypt, a few years afterwards, or if.
Yeah, well, and of course there's the lesson there, which we're not supposed to notice, is that the reason there was peace with Egypt is because Egypt kicked Israel's ass in 73. Israel was getting advised by Kissinger and others in the U.S. They were saying, war is not an Arab game, that, you didn't have to worry about any military threat from the people whose territory they occupied and everything like that. And then it turned out in 73, well, actually, Egypt did actually know how to fight. They did a pretty good job. They ended up winning back their territory, and Israel was forced to make peace with them.
If anyone would believe that there will be the Oslo Initiative after the trauma of the first
that's a great one to bring up, the Oslo.
Or that there will be a withdrawal from Gaza.
Which was which was never meant to be a favor to the Palestinians. It was called a redeployment, because there was a realization that they were using up huge amounts of military force for a couple of very small settlements. And it was creating a situation where they had to spend huge amounts of money, huge amounts of resources for a tiny settlements surrounded by 2 million Palestinians. And so they decided the thing to do was to turn it into just a concentration camp, wall it off from the outside, not let anyone in, or not let anyone out, and move the illegal settlers elsewhere.
After the second Intifada, nobody would believe, because Israelis and Palestinians right now are in a sense of of confusion, and what we in J Street called America to do is to lead. Leadership is not about checking what's the mood like a weather vane. It's more holding a compass.
And of course Israel has no problem with the U.S. leading things, because the U.S. is on Israel's side on everything.
Leading to where we want to be. We believe that this place where the U.S. should lead is good for both Israelis and Palestinians. And again,
which is great. There are no Palestinians at the table here. But he, speaking as an Israeli settler, wants you to know that what the U.S. is doing to promote land theft and colonization and genocide, the U.S.'s plans for Palestine are also good for Palestinians, just not in a way you would notice.
Again, I don't need to speak for Palestinians because Nidal
you just did
here. But for me, as a Zionist, I do believe that not using this tragedy into a change of course, because the course that we were on is leading us to a one-state catastrophe.
The catastrophe here, the catastrophe he's describing, is the possibility that Israel would have to just become a normal democratic state for all of its citizens, rather than being a racist, being a racist garrison state.
Which is, bad for Israelis and Palestinians.
Weird, because Palestinians seem to think that actually not having a white supremacist regime that holds them down and denies a substantial percentage of them even the right to vote might be better for them.
And you said about rewarding Hamas. So no, Hamas does not want normalization. Hamas does not want a revitalized Palestinian authority taking over in Gaza. Hamas.
Let's remember the Palestinian Authority. What did he just say now?
Oh no, Hamas does not want normalization. Hamas does not.
That's bullshit, actually. Hamas actually has been offering long-term ceasefires with recognition of the 1967 borders, i.e. the only borders that Israel is entitled to claim under international law, since 2008. And Israel's response to it every single time has been a massacre. Even now, the issue is not that everybody wants a peace deal but Hamas. The issue is that the only ones, that the Palestinian resistance are the only ones actually wanting to talk about any kind of durable, long-term ceasefire that could actually lead to any kind of a peaceful resolution of the situation. They're literally the only ones. The U.S. rejects it and Israel rejects it.
Not want a revitalized Palestinian authority taking over in Gaza. Hamas.
A revitalized, which is, again, the Palestinian Authority is just Israel. And notice nobody's talking about elections. There's another thing to note. The last time that the Palestinians were allowed to have elections, the U.S. and Israel lost those elections. The U.S. and Israel were backing Fatah. And Fatah, because they had been utterly discredited by their collaboration with the U.S. and Israel, got their asses kicked in those elections. And Hamas won. But they were only allowed to actually, respect the result of that election in Gaza. In the West Bank, Israel immediately prevented it. And so Mahmoud Abbas is now in like the 19th year of his 4-year term. And no matter how many, you can say it's been 18 years since, Hamas got elected. That's true. It's been even longer since Fatah won an election. So, to the extent that either of them can claim legitimacy, it certainly isn't Israel's Palestinian Authority. But nobody, Israel and the U.S. definitely do not want elections because they know they would not win those elections.
Hamas want chaos, just like the Israeli extremists want chaos. So this is not a reward for Hamas. This is exactly the opposite, because the approach that we had before October 7th, that the Netanyahu government was in a way rewarding Hamas and keeping the PA high and dry, did not work. This is one of the concepts that were trashed in October 7th. So this move is actually exactly the opposite. It's not empowering Hamas, it's empowering people like Nidal.
It's empowering people who collaborate with Israel
on the two-state solution, who are against terrorism. And for so many years, the Israeli, the American administration said we cannot want it more than the sides, so we will wait until there is leadership.
Yeah, well, yes, and the whole reason they were doing that is specifically because they wanted to offer cover to Israel to annex all the land they wanted in the West Bank. But they have an official position, the official U.S. State Department position is in favor, is a recognition of the, that the occupied territories are occupied. That they are on record on that. That has always been the position they've maintained. Rhetorically, even though at the same time as they support that occupation in every single possible way.
that will do it, and there is no leadership. In Israel, we have the most right-wing government ever. In Ramallah, unfortunately, we have a leadership that lost legitimacy among its own people.
Well, yes. Why did they lose their legitimacy, though? Because they are, they are literally employees of the Israeli government. They're doing what Israel wants. They have a whole fucking army, trained and armed by the US, who have only ever killed Palestinians. Because their job under the Oslo Agreement that, these pricks are so nostalgic about, is to provide security for the illegal settlements.
And that's why you need the international leadership, and only the US could lead to that. I believe that, in times of earthquakes, this is when people move out of their comfort zone, and this is exactly the time to...
Wait, what? In times of earthquakes, people move out of their I think it's more that their comfort zone stops being so comfortable because of the earthquake.
Lead, and especially after everybody saw that this conflict has spillover effect, that it affects the Iran arena.
What's wild about this is he's so excited about this proposal. This proposal is literally nothing new. It is the exact same shit the US has been doing to string people along for decades, where the whole thing is surrounded by there has to be a negotiated final status agreement. The reason that they insist on that is because if they were to acknowledge, what international law has to say, there is absolutely no negotiation to be had. Israel has no claim to any of the territory they've taken since 1967. International law is not great, which is why the colonial occupation of 1948 gets to be recognized, because, international law is made up by a bunch of, by a colonial ruling class. They were kind of cool with that bit. But 1967 is well out. But if they make it a negotiated solution on the final status issues, then it's a bullshit process that can last forever, that no Palestinian with any self-respect will be able to participate in, which guarantees that they will be able to say, oh, the talks have broken down, and blame the Palestinians, at the same time as they've got their finger on the scale the whole time, which is why Israelis love U.S. leadership on this. They're like the only demographic in all of the Middle East that wants the U.S. in the region.
The Bab el-Mandab arena and the Ukraine-Russia war. So the U.S. cannot say anymore we cannot want it more than the sides, but actually lead to a place that is good for the U.S., good for the world, good for Palestinians, and good for Israelis.
The whole idea here is they realize Israel's legitimacy is absolutely down the gurgler at this point. And so they're trying to find something that they can seize onto to say, oh, see, actually, there's some sort of good result that will come out of the U.S.'s involvement in the region.
Thanks so much, Nadav. Before I turn to you, Nadav, I just want to ask you, Nadav, just another specific question about the full package that Deborah laid out.
Well, it's kind of an empty package, actually.
Which includes, return of the hostages, normalization with Saudi Arabia, and also a stipulation.
Which nobody can explain why anyone gives a shit about that. Israel's relations have been normalized with Saudi Arabia in all but name for a very long time. It's just that Saudi Arabia will pretend to be critical of Israel because they have to actually sort of mollify public opinion. But in all but name, they already are, normalized. It's not really clear who the fuck is so interested in that, other than the U.S. seems to want it.
Of the Palestinian state being demilitarized. Those are all things that I know have been recently appeared in some polling. Can you talk a little bit about how the Israeli public looks at this package that is
demilitarized state? Imagine trying to sell that to people who are, currently being genocided, that Israel should get to keep all their weapons and and all the new weapons the U.S. is going to send, but Palestinians aren't allowed to be armed for their own self-defense. This is liberal Zionism right there. That she could actually say something like this with a straight face in the midst of all of this. Like, would you want to be disarmed, living under the thumb of a regime that has openly stated that its goal is that you should not exist?
Is essentially laid out in our proposal in a few words before I turn to Nidal.
First of all, there is a lot of confusion because it's different according to the question that you ask. If you ask Israelis just about a Palestinian state, it's very negative. But if you ask them about a situation where there is a demilitarized Palestinian state,
so it isn't an actual state.
There's a Saudi normalization with Israel. There is a new kind of alliance of the moderates in the region against Iran and its proxies. Then people move very to a different...
Yeah, so like essentially if you say, we'll call it a state, except they don't get to have any of the things that actually normally go with state sovereignty, like having their own military, having their own control over their borders or whatever, all the normal sort of shit. I wonder if there's a historical... Oh, that's right, yes, in South Africa it's called Bophuthatswana, and KwaZulu, and KwaNdebele. This is... They're describing a fucking Bantustan.
Different place, and Geneva did, the Israeli side of Geneva did a survey like that, and when you ask the question with all the attributes that...
In other words, in which it becomes clear that what they're offering gives Palestinians nothing except the right to pretend that they have a government.
Deborah described, then the reaction is much more positive, and I believe that it will be much more positive when the international community will move in that direction, because it's important to understand that what...
So, like, the more openly apartheid the arrangement is, the more Israelis can go for it.
Biden has right now is a very unique situation in Israeli public opinion, which, for example, Obama never had. Because he embraced us in such an amazing way, and he was the father figure for Israelis when they did not have a father figure of their own in the most traumatic times, the leverage, the leadership of the U.S. is so important. And
it's interesting, he he says leverage and then he sort of moves away, because of course acknowledging the leverage is giving the game away. Because literally nothing that Israel's doing right now would be possible without the U.S. providing weapons on a just-in-time basis.
It can really change public opinion in Israel, because people now see that Biden is a great friend. They understand that America is our best friend, unlike all the talks before that maybe Putin, maybe Trump. Now everybody understands that Biden is the real friend. And if Biden...
Not everybody. I mean, the right-wing Zionists are having a real normal one. You look at the Likudniks, and I mean, we look at JNS TV on here sometimes, which is very Likud affiliated, and they've constantly got these video titles like Biden declares war on Israel, and it's like, and no, he fucking didn't. Shit, I want, if that's having war declared on you, they just sort of shower you with gifts. I want war declared on me.
We'll be able to use that leverage.
You can declare war on me on my Patreon.
After embracing Israel and also giving the Palestinians a political horizon, I think that it will also be good for him politically at home. But of course, the Americans here could speak better about the American politics than me.
Thanks so much, Nadav. Okay, Nidal, I'm going to ask you a series of questions that we've been getting relating to...
This is the token Palestinian.
...to how Palestinians would perceive the package that Deborah has outlined. The first question relates to the conditions that relate to U.S. recognition of Palestinian statehood.
U.S. recognition of the abstract concept of Palestinian statehood. They were very, very clear in the segment we watched last week that this had nothing to do with territory. It didn't mean that Palestinians that the U.S. recognized any of Palestinian territorial rights.
And there are several things that relate to things that would be actions that the PLO or the PA would be would have to take. This also includes demilitarization. This relates to democratic reforms.
What democratic reform? You're not going to have elections? How are you going to have democratic reforms when the only so-called Palestinian government is literally just a dictatorship that is under Israeli control?
So how do the Palestinians, would they perceive those specific conditions? And are there Palestinians that are prepared to lead the type of Palestinian state that is outlined in those conditions?
So a Bantustan with no territory. So it's a Bantustan, except Bantustan's had territory.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much, Adina, and thank you, J Street, for...
This guy is from a U.S.-based and U.S.-run NGO based in Ramallah.
For hosting this important meeting and for making this 4 points proposal, which I believe very relevant, and I believe for a person like me, I can comfortably live with, and I can even contribute to outlouding it and making it more vocal.
Yeah, I would love to see him try to explain why the Palestinians don't get to have the right to defend themselves after this fucking genocide. You know, I'd love to hear him explain. I'd love to watch footage of him trying to explain this bit to just a crowd of random people in Ramallah or fucking, Tel Sultan or wherever.
Even among the Palestinians. When it comes...
So, do we get our territorial rights recognized? Well, no. Well, I guess we do have the right to resist the occupation at least? No, you have to give up all your guns. Does Israel? No, they get to keep getting more and more of them.
To the conditions on the Palestinian side. As a Palestinian, I believe the majority of those conditions are originally Palestinian demands. When it comes to the Palestinians, when it comes to the...
Well, which ones are Palestinian demands? I mean...
Constituency, issues that relate to reviving the Palestinian Authority, issues that relate to...
What does reviving mean? Notice nobody's talking about having elections. Nobody's talking about giving it real independence, because right now it's just an Israeli government agency led by a guy whose party lost the last election in 2006 and whose term in office ended in 2009. They just talk about revitalizing it.
Reforms are among their Palestinian demands nowadays in the West Bank as well as in the Gaza Strip.
Well, yeah, because they're so vague. I have a feeling that what Palestinians might understand there and what these people are talking about here might be a bit different. Because for one thing, I would imagine my impression from listening to a lot of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza talking about this stuff, and just my general impression of the situation, is that when they talk about that, they probably would like to have, actual elections and get, have the party that wins them form the government, rather than this situation where they have elections and then nothing happens.
So when it comes to those issues that...
Yes, and they just explained that not only does it not come with territory, it also requires demilitarization. Oh, I hope it was a good shower.
Relate, for instance, to changes in the government, changes of ministers, issues related to legal and administrative reforms,
elections?
combating corruption. The issue of incitement, I believe the issue of incitement and combating incitement used to be always
combating incitement. That means when Palestinians post against the occupation on social media and Israel's Palestinian Authority then takes them off to be tortured. That's combating incitement.
Palestinian demand, and even repeatedly there were this Palestinian call for reactivating this trilateral anti-incitement committee, which some days ago has
Yeah,
been,
I'm sure this guy. I'm sure this would, given what the state of Palestinian public opinion at the moment, which is to say that overwhelmingly they side with the armed resistance. Buenas noches, que overwhelmingly there is support for the armed resistance. I would love to hear him explain this like demilitarized, territorialist state proposal with where there's going to be revitalized. Israel's Palestinian Authority is going to be revitalized. What does that mean? Do we get elections? No, but we're going to crack down on social media posting more.
Proposed and never worked. So all those conditions, further to the issue of a demilitarized Palestinian state, would be comfortably and positively perceived by the Palestinians?
Like, I mean, see, this is the thing. This is what U.S. NGO culture has created. These people are just want to hear what they want to hear. So they have this guy who will say whatever the fuck they want to hear. Since everyone knows none of this is real. None of this means anything. Like, there's absolutely nothing binding on it. And Palestinian rights don't even get acknowledged. The idea, the steam made the fire alarms go off? That's not great. Well, that sounds like an impressive shower. Like, there's no territory. So his job, and he undoubtedly gets paid well for it, because there is a whole, like, comprador class going on, centered in Ramallah. Centered around Israel's Palestinian Authority, centered around US-funded NGOs, centered around all this stuff, and a big part of what they do is they send yes men to gatherings like this to have one Palestinian who says, yes, this proposal for a disarmed, defenseless Bantustan engulfed by a genocidal racist regime sounds wonderful. We would all love it. Palestinians would all love it. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because everybody in the room knows this is just some propaganda they're floating. It's never going to go anywhere.
At the level of the public opinion and at the level of the leading circles in Palestine.
Well, the leading circles in Palestine, that's to say Israel's Palestinian Authority.
When they will come within a sort of a package that will lead to the end of the conflict and an establishment of a Palestinian state.
I mean, this is in the midst of this genocide and all of the ethnic cleansing going on in the West Bank. And this guy has said nothing about any of it.
Your question whether there is Palestinians who are willing to lead within such conditions, my direct answer is yes.
Well, yes, there are always people who will be bought off, like, to pretend, by, the fake trappings of a state and some money and guns so that they can have power over a very small area. There are always people who can be bought off like that. I mean, that's how you got the fucking Palestinian Authority in the first place.
I believe any future Palestinian elections, which is also
the first time anyone has mentioned elections.
Dire need. The issue of democratic change is a requirement for the Palestinians. Unfortunately, the circumstances which have been created since October 7 until today are not conducive to elections for two reasons.
I'm very interested in what the reasons are, but it's like, so he's saying just since October 7th. I mean, the last time the U.S. and Israel allowed Palestinians to have elections was 2006. Is he saying that the conditions were conducive before that, and they just didn't have elections?
First of all, the technical aspect. It's not possible for the Palestinians within the coming few months to convene elections mainly in Gaza, but also the situation is also in the West Bank a bit problematic because of the settler violence and because of the new Israeli policies that target the West Bank.
Well, and also the Israel doesn't want them and the U.S. doesn't want them because everybody knows. I mean, the polls are very clear on this. Everyone knows Fatah would be winning these elections.
Further, immediately after the war and with this high polarization among the Palestinians and people, as Nadav tried to present it, became a bit more hawkish. It's not wise to take them from a time of a severe and bloody round of violence, war, and to elections.
Yes, because they might not vote the way, all the enlightened NGO people would want them to.
Especially when you know Hamas is being presented in such a way or another through certain media outlets, local or regional, are the ones who resist the Israeli aggression on.
Well, I mean, so he's saying the problem is, this is, and it's worth noting, this is something that the U.S., when they were, occupying Western Europe in the early post-war after World War II, was dealing with as well. Namely, the people who were likely to win elections were the ones associated with the anti-fascist resistance, the anti-Nazi resistance. And the U.S. did not like any of those people because a lot of them were communists. And if they weren't communists, they were some other kind of leftists. They were all people that the U.S. couldn't deal with. And this is what he's saying. What he's saying here is, at the moment, if you held elections, Hamas would absolutely sweep it. It would be all of the parties that are actively participating in the resistance would sweep it. And Fatah would probably lose all their seats. Because Fatah's entire role in this, I mean, leaving aside the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is the paramilitary wing of Fatah, which has more or less broken off from the party. They do not, they do not listen to Abu Mazen, to Mahmoud Abbas. They, the Fatah's entire role has been to torture and murder people who are resisting Zionist aggression. So yeah, I mean, the chances of them winning a fair election are not good.
On Gaza. And once there will be an integral package of a new government, a program, a Marshall program, the way also included in the proposal, definitely within.
So they get a new government, but they're not allowed to elect it.
Within this context, a new Palestinian leadership who can live and who can lead with such conditions is very potential and possible too.
So the leadership, but the point is, so the idea, what he's just said here is a mouthful. What he's saying here is that the only way this works is if the Palestinians don't get any say in it, because if the Palestinians actually got to vote on who their leadership ought to be, it would not be the kind of people who are going to sit in a room and suck up to J Street, because why the fuck would they? They have seen where that goes.
To be reached.
Thanks so much, Nidal. There's a couple questions I actually want to follow up on before I will turn back to.
And note that this is the first person. This guy was, first of all, the only Palestinian in the room. Well, not technically in the room, but in the conversation. And the only one to bring up elections. Nobody else uttered the word elections.
Deborah, there are questions that relate specifically to the release of prisoners that has been discussed in the current negotiations.
All of them?
And specifically relating to Marwan Barghouti, and wondering...
this is an interesting one. You see, one of the sort of various olive branches that Hamas leadership has put out to let Fatah supporters know that they're trying to, smooth over the conflicts that they have had, in large part incited by Israel and the U.S. in the first place, is that they're demanding that the one of the longest-standing Palestinian political prisoners, one of the most famous, Marwan Barghouti, is finally released. He's been in prison for decades. They call him the Palestinian Mandela. He is extremely popular, including especially he's a Fatah member, and he's extremely popular amongst Fatah supporters. And when Hamas made it public that they wanted Barghouti released, which was an extremely popular thing to call for, the Israel's Palestinian Authority immediately said, no, we can't allow you to, we can't, please don't do that, because they know the minute a guy like, if Marwan Barghouti gets out and can actually be politically active in Palestinian society in the West Bank, it will only spell trouble for Israel's little quisling army.
How Marwan Barghouti would fit in to the proposal that we are discussing here, if at all.
If at all, notice. They're, it's just so cute how they just talk about, this guy's been held just on bullshit, just as a political prisoner for decades, as a hostage. He's been tortured for decades. And she just sort of blithely says how Marwan Barghouti would fit in, if at all. Like,
your perspective and from the Palestinian public's perspective, as he continues to be a very popular figure among the Palestinian public, and then also I would ask, in addition to touching on that, also ask you to touch on, from your perspective, how to deal with Hamas in a proposal that is outlined as we have outlined.
Well, on the first part of the question, the one that relates to prisoners release and specifically Marwan Barghouti, for me, I'm not concerned about, the beliefs of Marwan Barghouti as a person. Marwan Barghouti in the past, before he was arrested by Israel for a long time, he was affiliated actually also to the moderate camp in Palestine. And so
what he means is to Fatah, back before Fatah became just a straight up Judenrat, just a collaborator
many
force.
Israelis knows Marwan Barghouti personally, and they had with him a certain experience of dialogue and initiating certain plans or proposals. So Marwan is a type of person with whom you can achieve a progress and probably also reach something. But Marwan is very popular among the Palestinians today,
unlike the Israel's Palestinian Authority, unlike guys like him.
All public opinion polls gives Marwan a high percentage of popularity and support. I'm a bit concerned actually about the circumstances of releasing Marwan Barghouti.
Yeah, here it comes.
Nowadays, the fact that after more than 20 years, Marwan Barghouti will be released through Hamas and through a deal, a prisoner's swap, where all previous rounds of talks between the Palestinian Authority and Israel and the attempt.
Well, yeah, what he's leaving out here is Israel's Palestinian Authority is on the record opposing Barghouti's release.
To release Palestinian prisoners as part of the peace negotiations failed to release a single prisoner, and now Hamas will come back with hundreds or probably thousands of Palestinian prisoners, including heavyweight prisoners, probably this in a way or influence, in a way or another, affect, their future positions.
Yes. So, in other words, the problem is that these collaborators have failed, their path of sucking up to Israel and then asking for a few table scraps has not actually achieved anything. And the last thing he wants is, as somebody who is on that particular tip, who is very much involved in the US-backed NGO circuit in Ramallah, he does not want for Palestinians to see that actually resistance, direct action, gets the goods.
But definitely not to the extent that Marwan al-Barghouthi or those who belong to Fatah will become Hamas. So in this regard, I believe he is a potential person, and he can be among the people who could also contribute to the future leadership of the Palestinian Authority.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you, to you, I think, and Nadav to talk about spoilers. But first, I want to go to Deborah because we've gotten a lot of very specific questions relating to final status issues and
final status issues. Again, if you will remember, perhaps, a decision by the International Court of Justice back in 2004. It was an advisory opinion on the status of the apartheid wall back then. And in the course of that decision, they unanimously concluded that all of the so-called final status issues, which the U.S. uses to draw this stuff out ad nauseum, just eternally, all of them are completely controlled by international law. The status of Jerusalem, the status of the West Bank, the status of the Gaza Strip. All of what boundaries, what borders Israel is allowed to claim, if any. All of that is already been decided by the ICJ in 2004, and they said Israel has no right to even 1 square inch of the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. The greatest territorial extent they're allowed to claim, let alone the Golan Heights and stuff, but that wasn't an issue in the case. The 67 borders are the greatest territorial extent that they're allowed to claim. So the final status issues are just bullshit. And the U.S., what they do is they just sort of pretend this stuff didn't happen. Because the U.S. knows that that international law means nothing as long as overwhelming force is against it.
Core issues related to the conflict. How does our proposal address those core issues?
Now, the last we heard, the proposal did not address those issues at all. In fact, the guest who was talking about this proposal was at great pains to explain that U.S. recognition of Palestinian statehood did not mean recognition of Palestinian territorial rights. That all of that was subject to negotiations on final status issues, which is what the U.S. has always done to string this along eternally as Israel steals more and more land.
Thanks, Adina. So first, let me say this. Our proposal makes very clear that final status issues will be determined in negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians.
With the U.S. on the side of Israelis.
So let's start with that. Now,
that's nothing. That's not any recognition of any Palestinian land rights at all.
Said that, J Street does have long-standing...
This group claims to be pro-Israel and anti-occupation, and they won't even commit to the just baseline idea that Israel doesn't have a right to the West Bank.
Policy positions on these particular issues. We do see East Jerusalem as the future capital of a Palestinian state. I would note that the Washington Post piece that I referenced in my earlier...
Well, okay, so what about the massive settlements that encase occupied East Jerusalem?
Remarks. Also talks about the issue of Jerusalem and how it's being broached right now in conversations that
i.e. by ethnic cleansing,
United States is having with international partners. And one of the things that is being discussed there, which has also been discussed in previous talks, is the possibility that the old city, which would remain contiguous to Israel, could be a special zone with international monitoring as part of that. That is certainly something that we are open to, but once again, going back to the original point, right? These are topics for negotiations between.
Yeah, and again, East Jerusalem, the status of East Jerusalem was dealt with already by the ICJ. Israel has no claim to East Jerusalem. They were never supposed to have any claim to East Jerusalem. It was supposed to be Jerusalem as a whole was meant to be an international city, precisely because so many different people lay claim to it. But it is, under international law, as it currently stands, as since 1967, occupied Palestinian territory. There's nothing to negotiate. But they want to, I mean, the whole reason to have this final status issues crap is because this is never going to be anything. It is just something to placate liberals with, and maybe a few members of, like, the Palestinian comprador class in Ramallah will join in, but nobody takes it seriously. But it's a way to sort of help rebrand Israel by trotting out some shit that anyone who's paying attention knows, apart from actually literally just being apartheid, is just totally unrealistic and unlikely ever to happen, because look at the West Bank.
Between Israelis and Palestinians. Regarding the right of return, J Street's position on this is long established. And that position is that the Palestinian right of return will overwhelmingly be to the new Palestinian state.
So what you're saying is you deny the right of return. Because the right of return is a right of return, not a right to go to in a fallback position.
They will have their right to return there. We are certainly open to, as has been discussed in previous negotiations, a certain, small symbolic return.
Yes, not so much that you could end up actually having Palestinians return to being the majority that they were before ethnic cleansing.
Of a small number of Palestinians to the state of Israel. Certainly.
Do I need to explain how fucking racist this is? A symbolic return of a small number of Palestinians, and I'm sure they'll just love to they'll love to take you up on that too. A symbolic return of a small number of Palestinians to this extremely violent, fascist, racist regime, where they will immediately get their asses kicked. That is not the whole point of this, first of all, is to say that they want to maintain the racial gerrymandering that they achieved in 1948 through the Nakba. And the other part of it is to come up with something that sounds generous, but that obviously no one will take them up on, because who's going to guarantee the safety of these symbolic Palestinians?
The issue of compensation for Palestinian refugees should certainly be on the table.
Why should it just be on the table? I mean, it's something they are just entitled to.
Again, these are subjects for future negotiations.
And it's worth noting that under international law, they have the option. They can opt for compensation or they can opt for return. They have the right to both.
Zadina.
That's not something that Israel gets to decide.
And Nadav, I'm gonna turn to you with a question about
Adam.
our proposal in terms.
Hey, Adam, I was just reading Rob Wallace's book. The fault is in our SARS. And there is a mention of a guy by the name of John Gullick involved in, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, involved in editing that. And I was wondering, is that any relation? Or is that just pure coincidence? Because you're the first time I've ever seen that surname of yours. And so when I saw somebody else with the same surname, I thought, could they be related?
In terms of ensuring security guarantees for Israel. So
yeah, notice the only people who get to have any right to security are Israel.
So our proposal does offer Palestinians a Marshall Plan style effort to rebuild Gaza and, of course, build up also the West Bank.
That is just, Marshall Plan style effort is so fucked up. Because the thing is, they're not entitled, the Marshall Plan was something the U.S. did to keep Western European post-war regimes sweet while helping to fund their expeditionary forces that were trying to take back their colonies. What we're talking about here, the U.S. it did not. The U.S. was not responsible for destroying those countries in the first place. That was what Germany did. Here, the U.S. is responsible for wrecking Palestine. The U.S. is absolutely responsible for every single bit of destruction. That's not a Marshall Plan. That's not some generous shit. That's called reparations, and that's not something that the Palestinians should have to beg for or that should be subject to any kind of conditions. They are entitled to have every fucking stone put back in its place. Every single bit, every single bit of destruction returned to the status quo ante.
What are the other types of external security guarantees that it offers Israel beyond the expectations relating to Palestinian reform? How would this proposal ensure Israeli security?
Well, I think that many Israelis learned from...
This is not from before the genocide, remember? This is during. This is a couple of months ago, let me see. A couple of months ago, and they will 4 months ago. Okay, and all they're talking about, the only people whose security they think needs to be discussed is Israel. Like the fact that Palestinians are looking at this situation and might consider that actually they need an insurance policy, that they need some security, that they absolutely need to be able to defend themselves and have some sort of meaningful deterrent, that doesn't come up. Israel, the country that's killed tens of thousands of fucking people in relatively short order, they're the ones whose security needs to be ensured.
Too many commentators on TV and former generals that security is only a military issue, but it's not. Actually, what the Biden doctrine, as Tom Friedman calls it.
Oh God, he citing Thomas Friedman with approval. That never goes well. That is wow.
Gives Israel is
Thomas Friedman. It's worth noting. Even he, the official, as Belen Fernandez called him, the imperial messenger himself, looked at that absolute fucking car crash of a fake ass debate, and said, yeah, he needs to go. Even Thomas Friedman.
Much more secure situation, because there's no military way to defeat Hamas. Hamas is a movement, and we could kill many of them, but eventually Hamas will stay. The only way...
And not to mention that Israel is losing. And in fact, one of the interesting things about public opinion polling, we were talking about that a minute ago, a few months ago, 60% of Israeli Jews said that they thought that they were winning in Gaza. Now it's down to 10%. They know they're getting their asses kicked. The country is fucking falling apart. And meanwhile, a lot of these goons who have been sent in and have TikToked themselves doing all sorts of just utterly off the hook depraved shit are actually causing spontaneous reductions in force levels for the Israeli military. I believe that's what the algorithm would want me to call what they've been doing to an increased extent lately.
To really deal with the spoilers is through a diplomatic strategy that includes the regional players, and the regional players,
meaning the U.S.-backed dictatorships,
could provide a lot of security for both Israelis and Palestinians. We see it also with the peace that we have with Egypt and Jordan, that eventually the
Jordan, that's going really well. I mean, this genocide has really been starting to shake the foundations of the dictatorship in Jordan. Yeah, I mean, there are huge numbers of people who have been, demonstrating, demanding an end to normalization, wishing the resistance victory, and talking about opening the borders so they can join the fight. Because, I mean, it's worth noting, more than 50% of the population of Jordan is Palestinians. Palestinian refugees.
The diplomatic deal is what provides security And the thought that security is only a matter of tanks and soldiers is completely wrong. The US learned it in Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam, and I learned it in Lebanon, that you could not achieve security just by military.
Well, and also Israel's military just isn't very good at it. But okay, I'm just noticing the time. It is time to start wrapping up. Thank you to everyone who's joined in. I don't know if you saw this. I think some of you got here a little bit later. But I found some interesting stuff on the National Archives YouTube channel, including some vintage 1950s CIA propaganda that was made to manipulate people in Iraq. And that people in Iraq at the time, according to declassified documents I read 20 years ago, leading me to want to see this stuff ever since, said was just absolute shite. And I found some of them on the National Archive YouTube channel, and that was the first thing we watched. There's one more of those. Got a bunch of other stuff. So we'll see what we watch. Yeah, feel free to weigh in on the Discord. So thank you to everyone for joining in, and I will see you tomorrow. And if you aren't already in the Discord, drop that link for you so you can remedy that, rectify that. Yeah, exactly. When they talk about security, they are talking about domination. And the idea that Palestinians have any legitimate security concerns after, probably over 50,000 of them have been murdered and all of the Gaza Strip has just been laid in ruins, it just doesn't even get mentioned. And they say this in the same breath as they talk about how the Palestinian state would be demilitarized. It is just wild. This is liberal Zionism right there. Because they think that they're being so generous. That's how you know it's liberal Zionism. But okay, it is time for me to wrap up. Thank you to everyone who joined in, and I will see you tomorrow, I hope. Good night. Good luck.